I was telling you we're going to look at some social concerns that really came to a head in the 1980s, both in cities and in rural and suburban areas. Local governments strove to deal with some new crises in areas like health and education and safety. So there's some different crises going on in the 80s. These crises, what we're going to be looking at as far as health goes, would be things like a virus that was sweeping throughout parts of the United States called HIV, which ultimately caused a disease called AIDS. Drug abuse was at an all-time high in the United States. Another health concern was things like abortion, and education was always on people's minds. So one of the most troubling issues that concerned Americans in the 80s was AIDS. Now, AIDS is not, it stands for AIDS, which means acquired immune deficiency syndrome. But it's a disease caused by a virus that weakens your immune system, so that if you were to get sick with just a common cold, you wouldn't be able to fight it off, and that's ultimately how you could die. Or there's also other rare forms of cancers associated with acquiring AIDS. So it began possibly as early as the 1960s, and AIDS spread rapidly throughout the world, caused by a virus that destroys your immune system. And like I said, it weakens your body, makes it to where you're unable to fight off infection. It's like your white blood cells. Now, the way AIDS is transmitted is through body fluids, and most of the early victims of the disease were either homosexual men or intravenous drug users who shared needles. But there were also a lot of people, many people, who contracted AIDS through contaminated blood transfusions. You go to the hospital and you have to get blood, and they put it in you and you get AIDS. Also, children being born to women who were infected with AIDS. So as the 80s progressed, increasing numbers of heterosexuals began contracting AIDS, and as the epidemic grew, so did concern over prevention and the cure, which to this day it's still not a curable disease, but with advancements, with catching it early, you can still live a long life. So HIV is the initial virus which turns the disease into AIDS. Okay, so you see a big awareness and an increase in awareness toward AIDS, and this was called the AIDS quilt, which was created. Each one of these quilts represents a person who died. So it's that's the National Mall. It's enormous. So you can see just how big the epidemic was, and this is called the AIDS quilt, and it was put on display in the National Mall in Washington in 1987. And each panel honors a person who died of AIDS. Okay, I'm sure you guys have heard of it, right? Yeah, really scary for people in the 80s. All right, another health concern that many Americans were concerned about was abortion in the 1980s. And many Americans are still concerned about it. So abortion had been legal or allowed in the United States since 1973, since a Supreme Court ruling known as Roe versus Wade. And in this Supreme Court ruling, the Supreme Court ruled that that first trimester abortions were protected by a woman's right to privacy. So essentially what it does is it allows for a woman to have an abortion in the first 3 months of gestation or of her pregnancy. Now, opponents of legalized abortion quickly organized into a group called pro-life. They organized under the pro-life banner. And they argued that human life, humanity, began at conception. You know what conception is? When the sperm fertilizes the egg, like pretty quickly. So They believe that life began at conception and that no woman or any human has the right to terminate a human life by an individual decision. So proponents of legalized abortion, they describe themselves as pro-choice. So pro-life people against abortion, pro-choice people are supporters of legalized abortion. Now, the pro-choice argument is that reproductive choices were personal health care matters, and noted that many women had died from abortions performed by themselves or even unskilled people in unsterile settings before the procedure was legalized. Many women were going to seek them out regardless of the legality. So the legality would be important for women's health. Okay? So, and that was the ruling in 1973, that abortion was legal through the first trimester of pregnancy. Later on, in 1989, the Supreme Court ruled in a case called Webster versus the Reproductive Health Care Services in 89, that states had the right to impose new restrictions on abortion. As a result, abortion restrictions varied from state to state. Hello. Hey. Sure. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Right. Did he pay? I don't know. I can make a call and tell him to take him off. How about that? Okay, that's what I'll do. Okay. I just emailed that Frank Dave Robbins is all I do. Should be. Yeah, should be. Alrighty. Uh-huh. Bye-bye. Okay. What was I talking about?
States' rights.
Yeah, states could impose new abortion or restrictions of their own.
What was the case that allowed, the Supreme Court case that allowed the states to?
Webster versus Reproductive Health Care Services, 1989. Can a woman get an abortion in the state of West Virginia? Yes. Okay. So it's up to the individual states. So things are changing. It's obviously a fluid situation, and it is an argument which is extremely heated all the way from the 1970s through today, and I don't see it not being a heated debate in the future. Okay? So questions on that? And you're welcome to feel however you like about it. All right. Another social concern of the 1980s were battles about drug abuse, which was almost as attention-grabbing as the battles over abortion rights when it came to public attention. A few people argue that drugs should be legalized to reduce the power of gangs who made a living on selling illegal drugs. Others called for treatment facilities to treat addictions. And the Reagan administration, President Reagan, launched a war on drugs. That's what it was called, the War on Drugs. And supported a lot of moves to prosecute users and dealers alike. First Lady Nancy Reagan, President Reagan's wife, really spearheaded the Just Say No campaign and toured the entire country with an anti-drug campaign that admonished students to just say no. You ever heard that Just Say No? Have you ever heard of the DARE program, also created out of the War on Drugs, the Just Say No? And You could not hardly turn on the television without seeing an ad about an anti-drug use ad, and I think I have one here. This campaign was called the Any Questions campaign. So let me see if I can. Come on.